Good morning, Hickett. Good morning, Hick. It's Tuesday. So there's this Marianne Moore poem called Poetry. I too dislike it. There are things that are important beyond all this fiddle, which is more or less how I felt about poetry for much of my life, partly.
How do you feel about poetry? Do you have a favorite poem? If not, why? What makes you dislike poetry? How do you feel about poetry? Do you have a favorite poem?
Partly because it seemed a little dead in the sense that, like, all the poets I could name were, in fact, dead, so there didn't seem. So there didn't seem to be, like, a present tense to poetry, but also I never felt smart enough to get poetry. Like, I thought to read a poem well, you had to be able to know that the wolf howling in the distance represented the poet's dead father or whatever. And that if you could figure that out, you were good at reading poems, and if you couldn't, you were bad at reading them, in which case I was bad. So I mostly quit reading poems and tried instead to focus on the things that were important beyond all that fiddle. But it turns out I love poetry. As Marianne Moore puts it later in that poem, one discovers in it, after all, a place for the genuine. And I am desperate to discover places for the genuine. And I'm also desperate for language that will help me understand the weird and overwhelming worlds I encounter within and without, and that's what poetry does for me. So much of my experience in the world is just, like, resistant to language, which makes it hard for me to understand. Like, I find it very difficult to describe my anxiety until I read a Page Lewis poem in which they write, "I feel as if I'm on the moon listening to the air hiss out of my spacesuit, and I can't find the rip. I'm the vice president of panic, and the president is missing." And I find it hard to understand and describe how, in a bout with depression, it feels like reality is falling out from beneath me until I read Emily Dickinson write, "And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and down, and hit a world at every plunge." And I also need poetry because it helps me imagine other people and their experiences more complexly. So working with the